where there was a copy of in a small population of study participants, transsexuals had a different copy of an androgen response.
Yeah, it was a longer longer strand in transsexuals, and you were saying that then means there's extra stuff in there.
Right. So if you add stuff to a protein, you can interfere with its activity. You can change its conformation and interrupt binding. There could be any number of things going on there, and so there'll have to be additional studies to figure out how that's changing it. But it does seem to change how it's responding to androgens.
Yeah, they were saying that particular strand structure had some bearing on the control of testosterone in the developmental phases. And the idea was then, like you were saying, if you've got all this stuff in there, this extra stuff in there, that it could be interfering with or impeding what would be proper regulation of testosterone on the fetus.
Right. It could be as simple as interfering with its ability to bind the androgen.
Yeah.
And,
it's certainly very interesting, and I think the thing that I love about this is that for a long time everybody labeled us as crazy.
Yeah, it's all in your head.
Guess what?
Well, it's all in your brain structure, certainly.
Right. But
they were right without realizing it.
Well, yeah, and some of us are crazy, obviously, but anyway, it sort of feels good to know that there is actually some science behind this, and that it wasn't just us being nuts. That guess what? There is some reality to this, and that this isn't just us deciding we want to do this on a whim, because God, who would do this on a whim? But there is some actual science behind this, and of course part of the problem is that you need to get people to study it.
Well, right, and there's
job.
not a lot of money in it. There's not a lot of money in studying this. We're
small population,
1/1000th of the population, right?
Where's the profit?
So
Exactly.
There's not a lot of money in studying it. We have a wonderful university system, and they're the ones we're depending on to do some of these these studies. It'll be very complicated. There'll be more than one cause. And it's going to take a while to adequately describe it, but we're seeing some of that come out.
There have been a lot of little bits of data that have come out of these small studies over the last several years that have, as you were saying, confirmed the notion that there is a biological fetal developmental reason. How we don't exactly understand it yet behind the development of transsexualism. It's not an emotional disorder, it's not a psychological disorder or behavioral disorder. It doesn't belong in the DSM or the ICD. It is a medical issue. It's not a chromosomal anomaly like an intersex condition, but it is a developmental condition.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to get information about it, really, because it's difficult to do the studies. You can't take a population of transsexuals and take apart their brains.
Well, I would hope not.
Invariably fatal.
There's a small population of the people in the U.S. that would probably like that to happen.
Well, yeah, certainly. Yeah. Go ahead, remove their brains.
Yeah.
And even when you do these studies, you're looking at an adult transsexual who has likely been taking female hormones for a long time, and the pushback is when you find a structure that looks rather more female than male, the pushback is that, well, the long-term high-dose hormone therapy is what's caused this development. And I sometimes have a hard time buying that argument.
So what they really need to do then is dissect the brains of several thousand 20-year-old transsexuals.
Right.
That might be difficult.
Might be some resistance to that.
There is going to be some ethical questions surrounding that sort of a study.
But hopefully there'll be more research done.
Yeah.
Less fatal research, hopefully. But I think it's a good thing, and I think we're on the right road here. I think it's a good thing that it's actually being studied, that somebody actually cares a little bit. I'm hopeful.
Well, and actually, this is actually probably a good segue. Because of all of these little discoveries that have been happening over the last decade, there's an effort underfoot that we had come across to recategorize this condition, not as transsexualism, which is seen by the larger community as a mental health issue,
right,
which has no cure, but understanding it as a biological developmental issue. They're calling it the Harry Benjamin syndrome, after the doctor that originally identified transsexualism as being a condition and not just, as you said, crazy people.
Right.
I don't know how widespread it's gotten, but it's an interesting take on it, that there's this effort underfoot that says transsexualism is being seen by the medical community as a mental health issue. It's in the DSM and the ICD, and we don't have mental disease. This is a biological developmental issue, and it needs to be treated as such.
Right. And
it needs to be identified as such and discussed as such.
Yes. Yeah, and maybe you should explain to the audience what the ICD and DSM are, just in case they don't know.
True. The DSM is the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual, 4th edition, and the ICD, I forget the acronym, but it's another diagnostic manual. They both get reviewed and renewed regularly.
Right.
They're the diagnostic manuals used by the mental health community.
Right.
They describe in great detail all the various different behavioral and psychological problems that are deemed categories that you can be put into. What the symptoms are and what possible treatments are, and their medical manuals.
And it's interesting that one of the big reasons for having these kind of manuals and categorizing this stuff the way they do is for insurance. It's a lot of it is about coding for insurance, so that because insurance companies, if you don't have the correct diagnosis code on the paperwork, they don't pay. So all of this stuff has to fit into this little category, and okay, here's the correct number to go with this, and the insurance pays. And if you so a lot of this is done sort of out of necessity to try to get the insurance companies to cough up the money, because we all know that insurance companies left to their own devices wouldn't pay for anything.
Well, and there's also from a science standpoint, treating these doctors as educated scientists, there's a valuable reason to be able to put bounds around something and define it. If you can define the characteristics that are common to patients suffering the same condition, then you can identify what that condition is. You can give it a name. You can identify the symptoms. You can develop treatment plans for it. Without that kind of pigeonholing, without that kind of containment, you just feel sick. You don't have a cold. You don't have influenza. You just feel lousy, you know.
Right.
You know, and you know, she'll be able to tell you, like, in science, the goal is to figure out why.
Right.
That's at the end of the journey, is why. As long as you can keep asking why, you haven't found your answer.
Right. Why haven't I found my answer? Yeah. So anyway, it's all a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing. And all in all, I think we've come a very long way, and I'm very pleased about that. And so anyway, perhaps we should talk a little bit about some of the other issues other than my love life. I mean, we can get to my love life, I promise.
The other thing I thought that was interesting about about some of the questions that were asked by the students, since we're sort of on a medical topic here, was their interest in sort of the effects and side effects of treatment. There were a lot of questions about how treatment affects us biologically, mentally, sexually. You know, there were a lot of interesting questions that I wouldn't have thought they would have cared much about
Right.
about performance and sensitivity